Awesome. So we're here today live on Saturday. Planetary Health first, Mars next. We got a special guest.
Health Tech does not take weekends.
What?
Health Tech does not take weekends. Health Tech is a 7-day-a-week job.
Yeah, we got to keep the wires working. We got Neil Carpenter here. And Neil, you want to just take it off? We're going to try to do a JP Morgan quick take from what you saw on the ground in San Francisco this past week.
Okay, so first of all, I was not in the physical sessions. JPM is a strange conference where most people don't actually go to the conference. So there's the core JPM conference in a small Westin hotel, Westin St. Francis, and then most people are at outside conferences, meetings, like all these, like the coffee shops have as much census as the actual conference. So all the surrounding coffee shops are busy, people are having meetings, the Four Seasons Hotel is swamped. It even flows over to the nearby Equinox, which I just gave away my secret meeting spot where people are having meetings. Because it's like hard to find like nice meeting space. Like I literally met with some Wall Street Journal friends and we huddled outside of a Pete's Coffee in the rain under like a canopy. It was ugly. So it just is what it is.
Yeah, I saw someone make a post that it was like $145 for an hour just in lobbies, just to make sure. I mean, it's like crazy, right?
Dude, I think. Sorry, I'm gonna share the secret of the Vibe Collective. That VC fund is smart. They just like post up early in the Four Seasons lobby, order a bunch of stuff, and then just sort of over. So maybe they order $200 over the course of the day, but they're fed. Their guests are fed, and they have like a nice space to hang out. So it's a little bit like, camping out for 4th of July or for Taylor Swift tickets or for merchandise, right? Like you gotta be all in or you're never going to get anything.
Yeah. I also made a little post. I got a little traction. I did Wedding Crashers because 90% of the people are not invited, right? Like that are, so anyway.
Yeah. But, I met with some people who actually are invited. It was kind of funny. And there were some sessions in the hotel that I think people were confused by because they're like used to all the sessions being out of the hotel. And so I think they thought there was like some things were open that aren't really open. They're only open to like, 5% of the people in town. But I will say, long story short, so I've gone for many years and for different, employers and audiences. But I would say attendance was actually down this year. And I think it might be the competition with CES. A number of friends of mine came and then left for CES or just went to CES. So having them on conflicting weeks, I think, is really tough. In addition, obviously, the capital financial markets are different. So a bunch of venture firms that might have even had parties or sent a couple of people just didn't even send anybody. And the way that I know that this anecdotal view got legs to it is because some of my friends or some people I know booked hotels last minute, and their hotels were cheaper than those of us who booked a couple weeks out or a couple months out. So like, admittedly, I might have found the exact right day to cancel all my hotels and rebook all my hotels, and I didn't bother. But normally it's almost impossible to get a hotel there last minute. Instead, it was actually like cheaper to go last minute because obviously hotels had synchronized their prices to hit like past years, and then suddenly it didn't meet that demand for last minute bookings, and so they had to drop prices.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what did you see? So what are some things you think some of our audience would find interesting?
Yeah, and so Kat McDermott made this point as well on her point, but it's like a reminder for those of us in health tech that we are like small fish compared to the biotech and like med tech buckets when it comes to like capital markets and like there's just a lot of money in those businesses. There's money in health tech, but not the same way. And so you could tell by like, the size of the parties, by the number of hotels, the number of conferences that were geared towards biotech, the number of conferences were like, hey, come to our conference for the day. We're biotech. It's only $4,000 for the day, right? Like, people gripe about how much health costs, but people are charging that much for a day-long conference with no fancy entertainment in some of these corridors. So it's just a reminder that there's still a lot of capital in other parts of the system. So that was one takeaway. Let me talk about some questions I had that were not resolved. So, I was at the UC Davis Valid AI conference, which I thought was great. The General Catalyst gang presented around their whole buy a health system thing. I'm still not clear on what that's really going to accomplish that people don't already accomplish trying to partner with health systems. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get my question in. Almost all the questions were about how General Catalyst is going to do this. There's almost an assumption this was a good idea, and these are obviously smart guys and people, but I was sort of like still not clear what you're not accomplishing in all the different kinds of partnerships that exist today with hospitals, health systems, and health tech, that you need to own one. Is it that the people just aren't good enough to execute on the strategies, that you're not collecting enough data to execute? But like spending a big amount of capital on a health system is a very big price to pay for those things. And so there is just a tone and tenor of digging into this that I thought hasn't happened yet. I'll also say, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here quickly. So let me pause on that. Any comments on that real quick?
When I hear that, I almost think, is there a benefit if you own a health system or hospital system with the bond rating status? I wonder if there's so many other things from.
Yeah, maybe it's like access to capital. Maybe it's, there's something else going on here. In the strategy. Maybe they just feel like it would be more proud proof point, or maybe they eventually want to build a coalition of hospitals and health systems. And they're like, we need to buy number one to see if it works. And then we're going to kind of keep trying to roll them up if it does work, right? Like we can really do something fundamentally different.
And do you think maybe with rural health, I mean, they I mean, someone's going to have to take that bag of the rural health systems. Maybe they have the technology stack. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, that's a really interesting point, because in some of the other conferences, I heard a lot about rural health. I'm hearing less about rural health. Okay. Honestly, I feel like, to be honest with you, some of the things that were sexy, but the financials weren't great, I'm hearing a lot less of. I'm hearing less about social determinants, honestly. I mean, you still hear that. I hear a little less about rural health. Some of the things that people are extremely jazzed about, I'm feeling like I'm hearing a little less of, and a little bit more about, hey, how do we use AI to create efficiencies inside a hospital around resources, around like lowering staff costs? We're getting a little bit more meat and potatoes, I think, and P&L focused. Definitely a big focus on P&L, and definitely a big crush on some of these companies that are trying to raise money to be profitable. And I'm like, how do you be profitable, to be honest with you, when you're like super subscale? I mean, the only way to do that is to like just not be paying people, right? Which is in and of itself kind of a false financial flag, right? And so, yeah, I think that's interesting. One other little tidbit, something I definitely think is had some buzz in the past, and it's kind of been on the decline, the sort of price transparency argument. People like it, it's cool. But to be frank, everybody I met who works for a price transparency company was looking for a new job. They either had been laid off or they were looking. And so that may not be fire, but I think that's a lot of smoke around that stuff being sort of commoditized and its impact being sort of, I think, questionable. Something I thought was, on the other hand, sort of, I was excited to see the buzz around it was generative AI and AI in general, but generative AI. I feel like I've sort of met some of the doubters on that stuff, but I was in a room at UC Davis on Sunday of people drinking the Kool-Aid, and I think rightfully so, and really trying to find clinical proof points around it. That was the main, I think, takeaway from the UC Davis event, was like, we really believe in this, but we got to prove it, we got to peer review it, we got to publish it, right? But I think there was a lot of interest in it beyond just like, hey, maybe we can find a company who helps us document our notes better, And so that I thought was really a lot of energy. And I think one of the other topics that had a lot of energy on it, and then I'll pause here, is aging. That's like not as sexy as social determinants, but guess what? We're all getting old, and like our healthcare system's under a lot of strain, right? Like skilled nursing facilities, like how do we care for all these old people? Like, it's a really basic, obvious question. Like, we got lots of questions in healthcare, but one of the most basic and obvious is like, what do we do with all these aging folks when we have like less immigration, we have like less workers, we've had it really hard to recruit workers, the ability of SNFs to retain workers and either other facilities is really bad. So like, what are we going to do? And so I had a very interesting lunch with David Shulkin, Secretary Shulkin, a guy named Sock Collins, who's super cool at Linkage, shout out, and a very smart woman and very dynamic, Abby Levy, from Prime Time. And so we were debating all this stuff. We didn't agree, all of us didn't agree on necessarily one real clear path forward, but it was a lot of energy on that topic. And I think a lot of interesting discussion in sidebar conversations on that. So I think I hit a bunch of my points. Let me pause with questions, and then I probably have like at least one or two more.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that you brought up the aging space. That hits home. My dad's 91. He's a retired internist physician. He's on hospice. My mom's 85. And I can tell you so many of those challenges with just the decision making, the communication. And the best thing was finally, after 12 days of being 2 times being hospitalized in 12 days, we finally were able to get the right person, what was called the hospitalist or the nurse practitioner, like palliative care specialist, that just was able to give us the right decision. So that is part of it too. And then I saw some other technology about it's just like little stuff, like how to deal with personal care. Like there's this person who has this dole-up for, I hate to say it, you have a 91-year-old father, someone needs to help him on toileting. And there's this little thing, you sit down and it's like almost like a duvet on your toilet seat. Gosh. So little stuff like that creates all the big added strain for caregiving and whatnot. So
yeah, and I met one cool tech company doing like urine analysis. Like, hey, we're like you stiffen in your toilet, super simple. Not super exciting, but it does gives you valuable health data. And it's actually currently using RPM tools, like RPM billing tools. And so there's a bunch of things that will be helpful. One of the things that David Shulkin and I were talking about a lot, and Scott too, was like the need for more intermediaries to try to figure out how do we tie value-based care, like MA contract and all this stuff, to this like litany of tools that are out there or different models to support people aging. Like we got to have somebody who can make the economics work. The analogy I would use is like an Aledade or a Privia or someone else like that has worked with primary care docs to try to make sure that if they invest more in prevention, they can get paid for it. Does it make sense in some way? But at least they have a shot at sort of making the economics work. I think we have a long way to go to get the same economic structural support around aging in place, and potentially even alternative sites of care like homeless shelters and stuff like that, to figure out how to make the economics work. Because you're kind of trying to sell them programs one off, but monetizing all that and just making the math work is hard.
Mm-hmm. I know something that I'm thinking of, one company, and it's Upside. I don't know if you've heard of them. They have it's a John Gorman portfolio. He's an advisor. And they're doing a really cool thing. They're basically have it sounds like almost like an algorithm to take all the excess capacity of 55 plus, all the different non-assisted living, and making it accessible to health plans. So they're selling into the health plans that sort of service, because there's just, with a little bit of modification, a little bit of things on the back end.
Yep.
You can make that work. And I know that's a nightmare. I can say that personally, when we went through that a few years trying to figure out what was the right spot and place for my parents. So.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well,
let me take a look quickly. Sorry, at my notes here. Oh, the other thing I think is kind of, the venture studio model's under some pressure. I think that was a theme kind of going in. I think people want to spin up companies. The question is, how do you do it? One of the things I thought was most effective, and it wasn't out of a venture studio model, it was another VC firm that will remain nameless, had invested a ton, clearly, at the conference and go-to-market support for their portfolio companies. So they're like, this company who know who they are. And admittedly, I liked them. I had a lot of fun. We were drinking. They had a very nice open bar. They had good food. So I'm biased. I can be bought off with alcohol and high-end hors d'oeuvres. But
all right, what is it? What's your flavor? What's your pick?
Oh yeah. No.
Gin, bourbon.
I'm a really nice gin guy. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, totally. So hang on. But as Will Schrank once taught me, it's actually about the mix as much as it is the gin. But that's another topic, another podcast. Okay. So what they did is really smartly is that they created co-working space for sort of venture partners, but also sort of blues plans, sort of a coalition of people, hear from companies. Feel free to co-working space is hard to come by JP Morgan, especially nice stuff that's close, and really sort of has started to invest in staffing around the platform to help communicate. So the companies they invest in really have access to the market. The thing that's killing these companies is the go-to-market costs are stripping beyond their capital cost. And so they're caught in this vicious circle of they don't have enough money to really go to market quickly, but without more customers, they can't get more capital. And so they're just going to die, honestly. They're just going to die on the vine. And so before, people were throwing a lot of cash at it. But the problem is you can't always buy your way out of that problem. And so instead, what this firm does, another firm I saw, I'll just say it's Semper Fidelis, and Vive, I think, is trying to do the same thing, is really building platforms ahead of time. And Redesign, one of my employers, is doing the same thing, like really develop a strong network so that when you make a capital investment, your portfolio companies have people to immediately talk to, not just for product feedback, for potential sales and everything else, so that you aren't spending a ton of money trying to cold call your way into health systems, which is almost impossible. I mean, part of the reason why it's so easy for Epic and Cerner and GE and people like that to sell in to health systems compared to the rest of us is because they have salespeople there, they have relationships, they have contract vehicles. It just means it's an add-on sale instead of a new sale. Especially on the hospital side, less so, I think, on the payer side. Hospitals are very brand conscious entities, in part because hospitals are very brand themselves, right? Like Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, your local community, image is a big deal, is that there is a sense of like, we want to invest in things that are safe. There isn't a whole lot of like take a flyer mentality in a hospital, because I think the clinical culture around knowing what you're doing and just making very safe choices expands into the administrative culture, right? So I'm kind of linking to a very macro point, but it's a very big one, which is like, there isn't a whole lot of giant risk taking that should take place in an OR, but that like lack of risk taking also tends to transfer out to the board suite. I think like not appropriately so, but it makes sense as a culturally consistent moment. So if you've got people who play it safe, it's really hard to penetrate them. You got to develop real relationships. They got to feel really, really comfortable with who you are to buy. And so whether it's either having a deep relationship with hospitals, health systems, or really knowing the right people and payers, finding the right people and payers is super complicated. Mm-hmm. It's not like there's a directory, and not like there's one decision maker, and not like it's weird. Sometimes the more senior big title person can get vetoed by a less important actuary who's just like, hey, this will cost us money, dude. And it just shuts that whole thing down. And so it's complicated. And so these companies need real go-to-market support. And so what I saw that I was impressed by are the VC firms who got it, who said, listen, we can't just write a check and walk away, because these companies are not going to make it. So either they write checks to people who are already super well connected in the ecosystem, right? Which means you're not only not a first-time founder, you're like plugged into the industry as a founder, right? Which is rare. Or you're less plugged in, you've got a good content, good idea, good product, and you can run yourself well, but you may not be as networked. And so we'll form the network to help you plug in. And so I think in that latter case, I think there's a lot of legs to that. It just costs VCs money up front. And so your numbers won't look as good up front, but otherwise I think you'll end up experiencing the backside. The other thing, and I'm totally stream of consciously this on you, dude, sorry. And for people.
No, this is great. That was great knowledge drop on that one with the VC strategy. So that was great.
Yeah. And the other thing I'm hearing out of some of the VCs, I think a number of the funds are in this difficult point of, do they admit that their investment is not going to land and they write it off, or they sell it, they really press hard to sell it, or do they double down to keep it alive? And so I know some people who are upset their fund is keeping things alive, that they think that they're just throwing good money after bad, and they need to admit that it's not going to look good on the performance tables. And so there's a sort of a fess up to your losses and walk away from the gambling table knowing you are not going to make money at Vegas this year moment that I think some funds need, because I actually think it would just clear out some deadwood for them to make some better investments. In some ways, I think some of the companies that are looking for investment now are actually better than some of the companies that have been invested in, because I think the pool is just narrower but better, right? And so there were some things that got some initial funding that just ain't gonna make it. I think we didn't think through the economics well enough of some stuff, to be honest with you, first round or last couple of years. And I think now people are much more attuned to, like, frankly, really stringent economics that make sense and are kind of, frankly, more realistic about what hospitals and what payers are going to buy. I don't know, probably it's true of pharma and med devices, but those are audiences I'm much less plugged into.
Are there any big drops you heard where some release of any large series investments is there any chatter on that
I think
that
the
you're hearing?
Amazon play with Omada and, everything Amazon does, Amazon burps. And I think people are like, what? So which makes sense, right? I saw Aaron and company there. I think the Amazon thing created some buzz. I actually found McKesson's announcement was interesting around data acquisitions. Obviously, they're trying to build a data platform. They have distribution down, but they're building some ancillary businesses. It was like kind of buried in their press release, but someone called it out to me that like, hey, they're actually like made a real investment in a real company and probably have the capital to do a lot more. And and it just got kind of buried behind some sexier stuff. But I did hear there is still a lot of interest in data plays. I know I talked about aging. Data plays are less sexy, but I think there's definitely a lot of interest in sort of having like really solid data foundations and like making investments to go compete with the IQVIAs of the world or other things. And I think there's a lot of room to go there. So that's at least two. I think there were probably more announcements in the biotech or medical device space, which I don't even pay attention to. Shame on me. I know my old boss, signed a deal around investment in his pharma company, so that's a good thing. To make sure that stuff can get to market. But in the med tech side, in the health tech side, I think it's more quieter things about people restructuring and scuttling things and selling things and, not the sexy kind of announcements, but they're news. They're just not, the front page of the newspaper kind of happy news.
What is if you could read the tea leaves, are we going to be up from 2019? What do you see?
On VC dollars?
Yeah, within digital health tech space. What are you thinking if you could be
the challenge with that is the accounting. So I haven't looked at this recently, but I think part of the challenge is like there were a few big deals last year. I don't know if those big deals will happen again, but there could be acquisitions, right? And so in my mind, there's sort of newco capital, and then there's acquisition deals. I feel like there's going to be a lot of acquisitions. I think newco dollars will be much harder to get a hold of for obvious reasons. There was nobody. I know of one person who recently got a raise, and she's brilliant and awesome, but I don't know if a whole lot of people were like, yeah, this has been a fairly pleasant process. Most people, most of the entrepreneurs I'm talking about now, are kind of treating a VC raise the way you might treat like an ongoing root canal.
Yeah. Wow. And so it's pretty much like the interest rates buying a home. It's 6% now, went up to 8%. And is that pretty much,
and what I don't know is how long can the funds afford to hold on to cash too, right? Because that's an issue, right? Because like they have overhead that's chewing into that. So I don't know. I also have, know a lot of people trying to raise funds right now. I think it's an interesting time, good and bad, to raise. But people are doing it. Like new funds are being created. People are successfully raising new dollars. I almost oddly feel more confident in the ability of the venture firms to raise it than I do in whether they're going to spend it. So there might be a bunch of raises and a bunch of sitting on stuff till next year, as in 2025, until the dust settles. I don't know.
That's fascinating. I think you're right there. I think it's always money there. It's just, Are they going to spend it? What Davos is as we speak? Is it going on as, it's probably like, is it like you go to JP Morgan and then you go to Davos?
I didn't have a ticket to JP Morgan, but I theoretically had a ticket to Davos. But then I was going to have to spend $10,000 to sleep in someone's garage every night. And so I passed.
I remember going, I guess Davos is someplace in Switzerland that I've yet to be, right? It's in Switzerland, right?
Yeah. It's in Davos. Like, I think, but the problem is like, there's like 3 hotels in town and they're all like Holiday Inns, right?
Wow.
And so you literally like, people rent houses, but then people are like, sending like C-level corporate executives are like sharing rooms in some cases. Like it's nuts. I think Davos is really good if you're a billionaire and can afford no, I'm serious. And you're like, whatever, I'll drop $20,000 a night on a good hotel and just stay there for $100,000, right? Like,
yeah.
There is money can solve all problems. In some cases, it's just a lot. I'm actually kind of surprised that people don't Burning Man it, that like someone doesn't like rent a bunch of like high-end trailers from Germany and then pay a bunch of people to just drive those suckers into Switzerland or from Austria or something. Like they got to have high-end like luxury, RV vans in those other countries. And if you find a place to park somehow, and you had a shower and a nice thing, I don't know, maybe it's too cold. Maybe those things don't work well if it's like 20 degrees out overnight. I don't know. People who've rented vans from Burning Man can send me emails and LinkedIn messages and educate me.
Have you gone to Burning Man?
I have not, but
Neither
what's weird is the older I get, the more my friends go. I'm confused, or it's maybe the scene I'm descending into as I get older, because I used to never know anyone going. Now all the time my IG is just full of people with Burning Man photos. They're cool photos, but
yeah. I think it was an interview requirement for Eric Schmidt at Google. They made him go. I don't know if you heard that anecdote, but
no, I had not. But I heard about his crowd going, and then like I know of a bunch of high end and interesting people of all shapes and sizes going. So
absolutely,
I don't know, it sounded kind of appealing. I'm glad I missed the mud storm, but
But speaking of Davos and speaking of Burning Man, I know the founder of whatever his name is that I read his book on principles.
Ray Dalio.
Yeah, Ray Dalio. Yeah, he was a Burning Man. You got to have the right jacket.
Actually, by the way, I thought the transition you were going to make, which would have really, really impressed me, is said, speaking of Davos and Burning Man, I'm holding a conference in DC, like March, April. I haven't figured out the timing. That would have been.
Well, we can't say that yet. We can't say it over the airwaves, but you heard it first. We are having a meetup, Planetary Health First, Mars Next. Neil gave you a whisper out. It's not a shout out.
And the housing won't be as expensive as Davos. You won't spend $10,000 to stay in someome's garage. I promise you that.
But I think you're onto something, man. I'd like to noodle that Davos thing, like a meetup for at Davos. I think there's something to that. I think you just shouted it out there and put it out there.
Hey, man, I really actually was very serious about going, and I know we both have to run, because I'm like, hey, it's finally an event where I don't have to listen to a group of unfunded 23-year-olds telling me they're going to solve healthcare. Okay, because if they're doing it with mommy or daddy's checkbook, and they've got like $1 billion to play with, and then they might do something real, even if they're 23.
Wow, Neil, how do we end on? We can't end any better than that.
No. But peace out. Happy Saturday. Look forward to continuing to chat with everybody.
This is awesome. Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, man.
You too. Take care.